hard to believe that domestic cats haven't always been part of our lives and graced our homes, whether as a farmyard mouser or simply as a kitchen companion. In fact, domestic cats were only introduced into Europe around the time of the Battle of Hastings. Since then, the household cat has departed remarkably little in behaviour from its ancestors. Unlike dogs, cats have kept their independence and still revert to the feral or wild state with very little encouragement. And of course, every self-respecting feline still retains its hunting instincts. It's often thought that the domestic cat is a descendant of the European wildcat, but this animal is quite untamable. Many have tried to keep one as a pet and failed. It seems far more likely that this domestic tabby originated from a quite different line, from the wildcat of Africa. The African wildcat certainly looks remarkably similar to the domestic tabby, though it is slightly larger. It spends most of the day resting and sleeping in the shade, behaviour familiar to all cat owners. Like most members of the cat family, it's solitary and prefers to hunt after nightfall. But wildcats do sometimes hunt during the day if the weather is cool. It often lurks in reed beds near waterholes, where it has a chance of creeping up on unsuspecting birds that come down to drink. It approaches using a ground-hugging run and then inches forward slowly to within striking distance of its prey. Unlike the European wildcat, the African wildcat doesn't shun man and often lives close to farms and villages. Over 4,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians bred from the ancestors of this wildcat population to produce the domestic cat that we know today. In ancient Egypt, cats became objects of a passionate cult and were held sacred to Bast, the goddess of pleasure and fertility. At the death of a cat, the entire household went into mourning, and the small corpse was embalmed and carried to the temple of Bast. Cats were considered so sacred that the Egyptians often risked their own lives to rescue a cat from danger. The practice of cat worship has perished alongside the Egyptians, but we still delight in the domestic cat. But the feline hunters of Africa that people consider most typical are the lions. Lions are unique in many ways. They're the most social of all the cats. The male's chief role in the pride is to defend the territory and females from other males. In lions, as in all cats, the female is smaller than the male. Male lions use their extra bulk to oust the females from a carcass. It's suggested that the mane gives the male the appearance of daunting size and strength without the drawbacks of increased weight. A lion pride usually consists of about 10 adult females, their offspring, and about 4 males. Lions certainly resemble other cats in spending most of the day resting together in the shade. The core of the pride consists of about 4 closely related females which grew up together within it. The breeding males within the pride are also related and probably arrived as a bachelor group a few years ago and took over the pride by force. A lioness will often allow another female's cub to suckle from her. This is almost unheard of among most other mammals, where the mother is extremely intolerant of another female's offspring. But as these cubs are the offspring of a close relation, the lioness is feeding cubs that still carry many genes identical to her own. It's rather like an aunt bringing up her nephews and nieces. The lionesses breed throughout the year, and the cubs within each litter continue to suckle until they're 6 months old. By the time the cubs are 2 years old, the lioness produces her next litter. The older cubs will be able to feed themselves at the carcass by then. In this way, the cubs within a lion pride always have plenty of companions and older brothers and sisters as playmates. It's believed that the spots on the cubs' coats indicate a distant ancestor in common with the leopard, probably a small forest-dwelling creature which followed its prey out onto the plains during the rise of the ungulate herds. It's the female that makes most of the kills within a pride. Perhaps the lion's mane makes him too conspicuous. Lions are most successful when hunting upwind, but in common with most cats, sight is more important to lions than smell. When several lions hunt together, they often fan out to encircle the prey, cutting off possible escape routes. Waterholes are favourite places for an ambush. Though lions can reach a maximum of 35 miles an hour, their prey is usually much faster, so lions must use stealth to approach within 100 feet of their prey. From that distance they can charge and pounce before it outruns them. Waiting for the right moment may take many hours. The lionesses must be patient. But an inexperienced male charges out too soon, and the setup is spoiled for the waiting lionesses. But they will continue to hunt from this waterhole. The bulk of the lion's prey consists of the larger antelope, wildebeest and zebra. During the dry season, these animals migrate to areas where the rain can be expected to bring fresh new growth. The lion pride is trapped within its territory and can't follow the herds as they leave its hunting range for better pastures. During periods of severe drought, this can produce quite devastating results in the resident pride. There are no cubs. They were the first to fall victim to starvation, and the females will soon follow, unable to compete with the larger males for what little game remains. In contrast, a female cheetah often includes the annual migration routes of her prey within her home range, though her movements are restricted while she's bringing up her cubs. Like most other cats, female cheetahs are solitary and bring up their cubs unaided. During the first 6 weeks, they remain hidden in the grass. By about 3 months, the cubs are fully weaned and follow their mother on hunts. They've already learned to wait, patiently hidden in the scrub, while she searches for impala or Thompson's gazelle. She watches the herd attentively before beginning to stalk. The cheetah is well adapted for her distinct method of hunting. The slender build and flexible spine enable her to take astonishingly long and rapid strides. Permanently bared claws give extra purchase like spiked running shoes. Unlike the lion, she can outrun her prey. Though able to reach 60 miles an hour, the cheetah lacks stamina, and she must catch up with her prey within a few hundred yards or give up the chase. Cheetahs, especially females with cubs to feed, make almost twice as many successful kills as lions or leopards. Cheetahs are able to maintain a relentless hold on their suffocating prey while breathing through enlarged nasal passages themselves. They often lose their prey to other predators, and however exhausted, they'll always try to drag the carcass to a safe hiding place. She allows the cubs first access to the carcass, while she keeps a wary eye open for scavengers. Unlike lions, cheetahs never return to a carcass, so they must gorge themselves at one sitting. Luckily, this time, no other predator appears on the scene, and they can feed in peace. Lions and cheetahs may occasionally climb up into the branches of a tree for a better view of the surrounding countryside, but the leopard is the only large African cat to feel truly at home there. It has a rather macabre habit of dragging all its kills up into the canopy of a favourite tree and draping them over the convenient branches, so that the tree forms a cool, leafy larder. In this way, the leopard can return to feed on a carcass whenever it likes, as it's well beyond the reach of other predators and scavengers. The leopard normally preys on small antelope and birds, though it does sometimes include another feline relation in its diet, the serval. The serval is less nocturnal than the African wildcat and often prowls around in broad daylight. These kittens are practicing their hunting skills. The serval seems to have an extremely long neck and legs in proportion to its size. It needs the extra height when hunting small rodents and lizards, which lurk beneath the grass stems. It often pauses for a few seconds and tenses, listening for a faint rustle in the grass before making an elastic leap in its direction. This is unusual among cats, where sight normally dominates over hearing. Small cats are particularly sensitive to high-frequency sounds such as rustles and squeaks. All cats use their ears for communication with one another as well as hearing, but none can match up to the caracal, whose ears have evolved into an exquisite mobile signalling device, topped by 2-inch-long black tassels. Even the name of the species derives from a Turkish word meaning black ear. Like the leopard, the caracal climbs well and sometimes carries its kill up into the branches of a tree where it can feed undisturbed. But it never stores food as the leopard does. It prefers dry scrub and acacia woodland and gives way to the serval cat in all areas where there's tall grass for most of the year. In Africa, the caracal also lives around the margins of the Sahara and in the Kalahari Desert. It's sometimes known as the desert lynx, though it's smaller than a lynx with a long, slender body. Like the wildcat, it will sometimes hunt by day in cool weather, and it's renowned for its ability to strike birds down in mid-flight, sometimes leaping 6 feet into the air. In order to avoid confrontation with lions, which sleep during the hottest part of the day, the cheetah often makes its kills around mid-morning or early afternoon. But unfortunately for her, this overlaps with the period when vultures are fully active and soaring on daytime thermals. If she's made her kill in the open grasslands, it'll soon be spotted by the aerial scavengers. A handful of vultures are unable to drive a cheetah off its carcass, but a solid phalanx of waiting figures is more disturbing to a cheetah, which is the most nervous and timid of the African cats. The vultures have attracted the attention of other scavengers, such as jackals, which hang about on the fringes looking for a chance to run in and steal a morsel from the carcass. The female and her cub put on a brave attempt to defend their hard-won spoils. But while their attention is distracted by the jackal, the vultures see their chance to move in. The cheetahs have no hope against a mob like this. Finally, they give up and leave the vultures to crowd in on the carcass in a shrieking mass. This is the main reason why cheetahs have to make so many more successful kills than lions or leopards. They have to compensate for the regularity with which they're driven from their kill before they even have time to swallow a few mouthfuls. There'll be nothing worth returning to here once the vultures have finished squabbling over the spoils. The cheetahs move off to rest in the shade. It'll probably be many hours before the female will attempt to make another kill. So far, every African cat we've seen has been a hunter of the plains. But some small cats, such as the elusive golden cat, choose to live in remote forests, emerging only at night to hunt tree hyraxes and rodents. The golden cat is about twice the size of a domestic cat, but is considerably more powerful and can bring down small duiker or pygmy antelope. It often shares its habitat and prey with the leopard. The leopard also relies on cover. It needs to find shade during the heat of the day. Leopard cubs are vulnerable to attack from lions, hyenas and baboons. They spend most of their time in hiding, waiting for their mother to return from a kill. When she returns, the long hours of inactivity are punctuated by explorative forays into the undergrowth, though they're never out of their mother's watchful gaze. Like cheetahs, the female leopard brings up the cubs entirely on her own. Her coat blends in perfectly among the dappled leaves and shadows. In fact, there's a great deal of variation in the leopard coat colour, ranging from pure black to stripes. No two leopards share the same pattern of spots. Leopards lack speed and stamina, so they prefer to hunt in thick cover. Once camouflaged against the leaves, the leopard melts into the background and becomes invisible to its prey. Though most leopard kills take place at dawn or dusk, occasionally the perfect chance presents itself during the day. The leopard is renowned for her stealth. She glides forward in absolute silence, each footfall muffled by the soft pads on her feet and the sheathed claws. Still unaware of any danger, the dik-dik continues browsing on fallen seed pods. Meanwhile, the leopard has discovered the perfect place from which to launch her attack. Tensing herself, a slight rustle betrays her presence. A warning bark of alarm, but it comes too late. She strikes with claws extended, followed by an accurate bite to the back of the neck. Her next concern is to find a safe place to conceal herself and her booty. A deep crevice among the boulders provides her with the perfect retreat. The leopard, in common with all other cats, is believed to have had small beginnings. It's thought that all cats evolved from an animal similar to the genet over 50 million years ago. The genet is placed in the mongoose family, although it has so many feline characteristics that it's often referred to as the genet cat. It shares the slender build, binocular vision, and retractile claws with the cat family, and stalks rodents, birds, and insects like a cat. Perhaps all modern cats owe their feline origins to an ancestor very like the genet. But the future of today's African cats is not so certain. The continuing destruction of woodland by elephants is driving the leopard into decline, and the cheetah, which once included India in its range, is now restricted to a few small pockets in Africa as more of its savannas are turned over to agriculture.
In spring, the calm inland waters of the British Isles are the perfect setting for a spectacular display. The performers are a pair of great crested grebes. They come here to raise a family during the warm summer months. The ritualized movements are part of their courtship ceremony. Out on the open water, they perform their elaborate and graceful water ballet. At the height of the display, they quite literally dance on the still water. The Latin name for the great crested grebe is Podiceps cristatus, which means rump-footed and crested. The crest, which divides into two ear tufts, and the glorious chestnut and black frills or tippets are used to express mood or intention. They'll play an important role when the time comes to display and dance. Rump foot arises from the positioning of the legs well back on the body. an adaptation for an almost totally aquatic lifestyle. Grebes don't have webbed feet like geese and ducks. Instead, each toe is fringed with stiff, horny lobes, and their claws are flattened like toenails. Like all water birds, they spend a great deal of time preening. Oil, collected from the preen gland at the base of the tail tuft, is used to waterproof the plumage. Just over a century ago, their beautiful feathers almost brought about their downfall. Surprisingly, it wasn't the flame-red tippets which were in demand, but the white satin-like feathers on the belly. Sewn together, grebe skins, or furs as they were commonly called, made soft, silky muffs. Their feathers were also used to make matching stoles and collars. Many thousands of grebe were killed to satisfy the whim of the fashionable female, until there were only 32 pairs left in the whole country. In 1880, an Act of Parliament put a stop to this wholesale slaughter, and from that moment on, the great crested grebe has never looked back. At the last count, there were over 7,000 breeding pairs. Its remarkable comeback is almost certainly due to the large number of man-made waters, which sprung up all over the country after the Second World War. Gravel, clay and sand pits, which provided building materials for the housing boom, and reservoirs which supplied drinking water for the new communities, were rapidly colonized by grebes. Today they are found throughout lowland Britain. They prefer stretches with open water and a good growth of reed, but otherwise they're remarkably adaptable. They even breed right in the heart of London. A remote loch in the Highlands of Scotland is home to one of 3 other species of grebe which breed in Britain. The Slavonian grebe is one of our rarest birds. It's easily recognizable by its conspicuous golden ear tufts. Rarer still is the closely related black-necked grebe. There are only 15 breeding pairs. The smallest member of the grebe family is widespread throughout the country. It's the dabchick, or little grebe. Like the great crested grebe, it breeds on ponds, lakes and slow-moving rivers. It's a dapper little bird with a distinctive rounded shape and bright chestnut cheeks in the summer. Unlike the other grebes, the dabchick does not take to a marine habitat during the winter months. Only when the inland waters are free from ice do the first great crested grebe fly in from the coast. As soon as they arrive at their summer haunts, each pair stakes out a territory of about 5 acres, which they jealously guard from all intruders. Coots are bold, bumptious birds, and, as we shall see later, can be a serious threat to grebes. Throughout the breeding season, vigorous border clashes occur between the 2 species. Single, unpaired birds are also unwelcome. These are often newly matured 2-year-olds looking for their first sight and mate. A series of loud vocal warnings are usually enough to intimidate a young bird. Occasionally, though, the intruder persists, and a fight ensues. Even the coot can't influence the final outcome, and the young bird retreats to try his luck elsewhere. Once their territorial disputes have been settled, the birds concentrate on courtship. The grebe ballet follows a strict routine. Turning to face each other, the dance begins with some head shaking. This is the most common display and is repeated throughout the performance. After a while, they symbolically preen the feathers on their backs. During the early stages, they perform a special greeting ceremony called a discovery display. One bird dives. Its partner waits for it, adopting the bizarre cat attitude. Stranger still is the ghostly reappearance of the first bird. Throughout their courtship, this ritual is repeated each time the birds are parted. Sometimes a discovery is followed by a retreat display. Suddenly, one bird patters across the water and adopts the cat attitude. The climax to the performance, and the most complicated ritual of all, is the weed, or penguin dance. Adopting an upright posture, first one bird, then the other, glides below the surface in a slow but deliberate dive. They emerge with a mouthful of weed, sail towards each other, and finally rise to dance on the water. Even the best performer gets caught out on occasion. The grebe ballet is over, but the ritual which leads up to mating is also quite a performance. Their first task is to build a special floating platform. The male brings in most of the building material, while his mate arranges it into an untidy pile. When the female is satisfied with the construction, She indicates her readiness to mate with a rearing display. After mating, in true grebe fashion, they celebrate with a final bout of head shaking. Utterly frustrated, the young, unpaired males flirt with some most unlikely partners. By the middle of April, the breeding season is well underway. Great crested grebes build large floating nests, which rise and fall with the water level throughout the summer and so avoid being flooded. And they're usually a few feet from the bank, where they're out of reach of land predators like foxes, weasels, and stoats. Each female lays 1 egg a day until she has completed a clutch of between 3 and 6 eggs. There are 5 in this nest. The task of incubation is shared equally by both the male and female, and they change over every 20 minutes or so. The female greets her mate with a wing-quivering display. It's extremely difficult to tell the sexes apart, but the female is usually the smaller bird with a shorter bill. Occasionally, the birds go off together on a fishing trip. Before leaving, the female carefully covers the eggs with weeds. This serves to keep the eggs out of sight from marauding crows and magpies, as well as to insulate them from the cold air. The newly laid eggs are conspicuous, and a clutch left uncovered soon draws attention. It's usually only young, inexperienced birds which leave their nests open to attack. First on the scene is the innocent-looking coot, but it's an opportunist, and with a family of its own to raise, a grebe's egg represents a nourishing meal. The carrion crow is a notorious egg thief. It'll remove the eggs one by one and eat them later at its leisure and at a safe distance. More experienced grebes are wise to the habits of their neighbors, and this coot receives a frosty reception. The coot is only searching for nesting material, but it's far too close to the grebe for comfort. The cat display is a clear sign of aggression. For now, the danger has passed, but the grebe's eggs are soon to hatch, and a worse enemy lurks, unseen, close at hand. It's mid-May. After a month of patient incubation, the first grebe chicks have hatched. As soon as they're out of the egg, the striped youngsters climb up under their parents' wings. Unlike newly hatched ducklings, which can swim and feed themselves from birth, grebe chicks are totally dependent on their parents for food, warmth, and protection. Their first meal is an odd one. It's a feather. The adults will deliberately pluck down feathers from their own plumage to feed their chicks. It's a strange habit, but grebes feed almost exclusively on fish. The feathers form a thick ball of felt in the bird's stomach, which protects them from the needle-sharp bones of their prey. That bright red spot on the chick's head is thought to stimulate the adults to feed them. The greatest threat to a young grebe lurks underwater. The pike is a fierce predator, and helpless chicks make easy prey. Grebe chicks are not the water babies one might expect. Their soft down feathers become soggy after a few minutes in water, and then they become sitting targets for hungry predators. The chick's thrashing attempts to climb aboard attracts the attention of the pike. its shrill calls alert an adult to the danger. Then the hunter becomes the hunted. This chick escaped with its life. Others are not so lucky. There's no doubt that large numbers of young grebe end up in the stomachs of pike. While one parent continues to sit tight on the remaining eggs, the other is kept busy providing food for the newly hatched family. The chicks are fed on a diet of fish, supplemented with the odd insect and worm. Sometimes the adults bring in fish which the chicks have no hope of swallowing. Getting the size right appears to be a matter of trial and error. When the last chick has emerged, the adults take their brood out onto the water. Of the 5 eggs, only 3 have hatched. The other 2 were probably infertile. At first, great crested grebes are careful to keep their chicks safely tucked up under their wings. If danger threatens, they'll dive with their young rather than leave them on the surface. This protects them from perch, zander, and pike while they're still small. But after a few days, they're already more adventurous. Now the adults unceremoniously dump them on the water for swimming lessons. Their feathers are now waterproof, and they're encouraged to spend less time riding around on their parents' backs. They've developed into highly demanding youngsters with healthy appetites. Providing them with enough food is a full-time job for both parents. This time it's a grebe raiding a coot's nest, but only for building material for its second brood. When the chicks are about 5 weeks old, the family often divides, each parent taking sole charge of part of the brood. And in 4 weeks, the adults will leave them to fend for themselves. With the onset of winter, our inland waters begin to ice over. The majority of great crested grebes have deserted the quarries and gravel pits where they've spent the summer to gather on larger reservoirs and lakes, where there are still some stretches of open water. Young birds are often reluctant to leave the security of their summer home. As long as there's a hole in the ice, they'll stay to hunt for food. Life underwater is second nature to a grebe, and as this remarkable film shows, they're highly adept at catching fish. Only prickly sticklebacks or very large fish are brought to the surface. Mainly they swallow their prey head first, whole and underwater. As the weather gets colder, the longer they linger, the greater the hazards. This one has left it too late. With one leg firmly frozen in the ice, there's no escape. Dancing on still water is one thing. Skating on thin ice is quite another. As the days get shorter, our grebe leave the inland waters and fly out to sea. Ahead lies a winter of fishing in the coastal waters and estuaries of Britain. The great crested grebe has made a remarkable comeback, but already a new threat looms on the horizon. Water sports are becoming increasingly popular, driving grebes from their breeding grounds. Separate space must be provided for both recreational purposes and wildlife. We must ensure that great crested grebes dance on our still waters for years to come.
That's all from me. Now here's Peter Rogers with the weather forecast.
Good evening. After the disappointing weather of the last few days, there's a change in view. An anticyclone over western France has brought clear skies to southern Britain, and we can look forward to a fine, clear night with a good deal of sunshine tomorrow.
For all the meteorologists can do, the weather in these islands remains unpredictable. If we turn to natural phenomena, will we get better results? Well, they could hardly be worse, so let's try. Red sky at night, shepherd's delight. Red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. Probably the best known weather saying, and it works. A glorious red sunset is caused by dust in a dry atmosphere diffusing the sun's rays. Damp, clear air would produce a watery yellow sunset. In summer, which is when most people are looking anxiously for fine days, the weather in Europe is dominated by a stream of cold fronts, bands of clouds sweeping in from the Atlantic. When we look westwards into the sunset, we're looking through the approaching air mass. If the sunset is red, tomorrow's air is dry. If the sunrise is red, the dry air is going away, probably to be followed by a band of damp air, shepherd's warning. When the dry air arrives, it brings us a lovely morning like this. The cows are standing up, but that's not necessarily a good weather sign. It means the grass is still wet with dew. Here's the sign that it's going to be a fine day. The scarlet pimpernel flowers are open. They call it shepherd's sundial or ploughman's weather glass. And if it's fully open first thing, it won't rain on the same day. That's because the same dry air that causes the dew to evaporate so quickly also opens the flowers after their night's sleep. From May to September, while the pimpernel is in flower, it's better than a barometer. Next to the barometer, the clock, the dandelion clock. It's not much good at telling the time unless it's a nice dry afternoon. If the dandelion clock gets the time right in the afternoon, then you know it's going to stay fine for at least a few hours. Like the scarlet pimpernel, the dandelion reacts to the dryness of the air. It only releases its seeds when they're fully airworthy, in other words, when they're dry. In damp weather, they won't fly anywhere. In weather like this, the dandelion only works as a digital clock. In damp weather, the scarlet pimpernel stays shut. But oddly enough, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to rain. On 4 days out of 5, when the pimpernels are closed, it doesn't rain. And the 5th is probably the one for which you've packed the picnic basket. Rain does more than spoil picnics. For some animals, rabbits for example, rainy weather can be dangerous. In spite of their big eyes and effective all-round vision, rabbits live as much by sound as by sight. Scent is important to them too. They normally feed at night, listening intently and sniffing the air as they eat for any sign of an approaching predator. Rain drowns out the sound and damps down the scent, so in wet weather rabbits feed by day, relying on their eyes to give them warning. That's why people say that rabbits feeding by day is a sign of rain. It's most probably a sign that it's raining already. For longer-term forecasts, country people turn to other animals. Moles are closely observed for clues to the coming season. If their hills are large and numerous, people say it's a sign of warm or mild weather to come. Others say it's a sign of rain. Opinions will always differ, and for a very good reason. As far as anyone can tell, the number and size of molehills has nothing to do with the weather, but everything to do with the supply of earthworms, the mole's favourite food. New molehills appearing in late autumn have a little more significance. They're a sign that the mole is preparing for winter by opening up its deep burrow system, which it doesn't use so much in the summer. Why does it do it? Because the earthworms go down deeper in winter. Since watching moles and molehills is somewhat more attractive and certainly easier than watching earthworms, people give the mole credit for being able to predict what's to come in the way of weather. That leads us into the lovely chain of events which foretells the coming of spring and the arrival of spring and summer showers. The greater celandine is known as the swallow flower. It comes from the Greek word kelaidon, which means a swallow. Traditionally, the celandines come into flower just as the swallows return to us from Africa. And so they should. Plants produce flowers in response to the length of the day and the temperature. Swallows migrate northwards in response to the length of the day and the changing weather patterns over North Africa and Europe. It makes sense that celandine flowers and swallows should appear at about the same time each year. Anyway, that's how the flower got its name. The swallows arrive when they do because the insect population is building up, as the increasing air temperature arouses them from hibernation or causes their eggs to hatch. The swallow didn't get its name from the fact that it swallows huge quantities of insects, though it does, especially when it has chicks to feed. It's more likely that its name comes from the way it flies, swirling about in the sky, swirlo, and that's where it comes into our weather story. All over the country, people say that swallows flying low foretell rain. And it's a pretty good prediction. Here's how it might work. Imagine there's a cold front coming across these fields. As the cold air pushes forward, clouds form where it meets warmer air. The leading edge of the cold air wedges under the warm air, lifting it and causing turbulence. Some of the insects in the air column are lifted by this disturbed air. They're followed by hungry swifts, strong and agile flyers. The swirling cold air forces other insects lower, so that they fly only a little way above the ground. Swallows, lighter and more delicate than swifts, follow them down to feed on them. Rather like the mole showing us what the earthworms are doing, the swallows and swifts show us what the insects are doing, and the insects tell us something about the air movements. And, sure enough, the air movements which make swallows fly low often lead to a shower. To get back to the seasons, autumn arrives with plenty of warning, in the form of colour changes in the trees, fruit ripening, a certain crispness in the air, and the nights drawing in. It's this last clue, the days getting shorter, which starts most plants and animals preparing for winter. The temperature has something to do with it, but the shortening days set up the trigger mechanism. Rather like cricketers, many plants and animals will remain active whatever the weather, until darkness starts to come too soon. As the leaves fall, no matter how mild the autumn, queen bumblebees go into hibernation, because the flowers they feed on have stopped producing nectar. They're producing fruit instead. Luscious elderberries blacken in the thin autumn sunshine to tempt birds to spread their seeds. Seeds are everywhere, all of them potential food for birds and other small animals. On blackberry brambles, the last of the fruit is scorned by humans but snapped up by birds. The blackberries have lost their sweet taste, but they still contain enough food value to make them worth gathering. It's not just birds either. Field mice, voles, and harvest mice climb autumn hedges for the last of the blackberries. Probably the best-known saying after red sky at night has to do with berries. Hips and haws and hollyberries are supposed to provide a wealth of food for the birds as a sign of a hard winter to come. Nature looks after her own and all that. One hates to throw cold water on the idea, especially at this time of year, but it's just not true. The number of berries on the bushes is simply a sign that it's been a good, productive summer. A hard winter sometimes follows a good summer, but there's no guarantee of it. After a poor fruiting season, a severe winter will kill half the small bird population, maybe more. Large birds, stronger on the wing, can move to escape the worst of the weather. In Spain, they call the lapwing ave fria, the cold bird, because it appears only when the severest weather has driven it out of more northerly countries, such as Britain. For the smaller fry, which can't keep out of the dangers of winter, human activities provide a lifeline. Fortunately for sparrows and finches, sheep are not very possessive about their winter rations. There's no cheese here, whether the yellowhammer wants it or not. No little bit of bread either. If nature does look after her own, it's by pitilessly thinning out the population until only the toughest can survive. The birds call a truce in winter, forgetting the territorial disputes of spring and summer in a joint search for whatever might keep them going. Their diets converge as well. Larks normally eat insects, but in the snow they have to be prepared to share seeds with the chaffinches. At this time of year, the birds aren't predicting anything. They're reacting to the conditions. It's not much help to know that small birds gather to feed in mixed flocks during hard winter weather. Shivering humanity can judge the weather for itself without consulting the birds. Incidentally, birds look tubby in winter because they've got all their body feathers fluffed out to keep warm, not because they're well fed. Most of the time they're permanently hungry. They can't forecast their next bite of food, never mind the weather. The blue tit is a special case, not because people predict the weather from its activities, but because it has to predict the weather for itself if its daring breeding strategy is to succeed. Of all our well-loved garden birds, the blue tit has the biggest stake in guessing accurately when spring will arrive. Blue tits begin nesting before the appearance of the main food supply for their chicks. For them, it's crucial to predict the hatching time of the caterpillars of the winter moth and the feathered thorn moth, among others. Furthermore, they must make their guess a month in advance. The investment is enormous. Gathering nesting material, in this case the fur from a dead rabbit, takes time and energy at a season when food isn't readily available. Yet by the time the chicks have hatched, a month later, there are caterpillars everywhere. How do the tits get it right year after year? Could we predict the arrival of spring more accurately if we understood? The answer is yes, we could, but only if we could search the trees and bushes as closely as blue tits do. The evidence now suggests that the secret lies in the bird's courtship behaviour, in which the male finds what early insects he can to give to the female. She digests his offerings until she's well fed enough to start producing eggs. By then, the whole insect population is recovering from winter. The moths have laid their eggs, and the caterpillars appear on cue, in time for the chicks to eat them. Sometimes, it seems, even the voracious chicks have had enough caterpillars. Blue tits aren't the only animals which seem to have an uncanny knack of predicting the change of the seasons. In their case, if scientists are right, it's not a magical sixth sense, but a matter of being able to gear themselves into the natural cycle by responding to cues such as the emergence of the earliest insects. A particularly damp spring or a succession of cold days can make food too hard to find and cause the first brood of chicks to starve. The tits don't always get it right. If the first attempt fails, they'll try again when the season is properly established. In Africa, where the long-awaited season is not the warm weather but the coming of the rains, the best weather forecaster is the boo-boo shrike. Just before the rains appear, the dusty bush begins to ring with its call. Sure enough, the rains follow, or so a lot of people say. Others watch the behavior of safari ants or listen for the call of the cuckoo. Everyone in Africa longs for rain, and optimists will snatch at almost anything as the first sign of relief from drought. Among animals which must have water to survive, waiting for the rains is not enough. Wildebeest follow the path of the rain clouds, not for the water itself, though that's vital in its own way, but for the fresh grass which springs up after the first rain has fallen. In their migrations, they're not predicting the weather, but following it, literally chasing the thunderclouds on the horizon. It's not clear whether they smell the rain from far away, or hear the thunder, or simply see the clouds in the distance. But what is immediately apparent is the urgency of their need to be where rain is falling. Hundreds of thousands of wildebeest move off the Serengeti plains and back again every year, a living weather map, charting the rainfall with their hooves. Further north, white-eared cob in the Sudan migrate over a route which carries them 1,000 miles every year. First, they move north to eat the grass exposed by the receding waters of the Nile floodplain. There's nothing meteorological in that, but afterwards they have to move south again, across the now dry and inhospitable plain, in search of fresh grass. Presumably, the instinct to move to the south is bred into the herd, but the location of individual rainstorms is impossible to predict. Whether they find them by sound, or sight, or scent, the herd moves as one towards the rain. Many of them die during this parched progress. To a cob, the observation of weather is a matter of life and death. They've been known to make fruitless round trips of 200 miles, following a cloud which failed to disgorge its promised rainfall. When they finally meet the advancing rains, they're a weary and undernourished group indeed. If the rains fail or come later, and they're sometimes very late, cob will die by the thousand. Later, in the far south, their problem will be too much water, not too little, but that's another story. Other migrants follow climatic changes. Some, like barnacle geese, move north to take advantage of the very short but abundant Arctic summer. Their movement has to be precisely timed. To human observers, it means that spring is at last arriving. The way in which the geese time their departure is still not clear, but there's a pronounced shift in the pattern of high and low pressure over Europe from winter to spring, and it's just possible the birds can detect its effects, sensitized as they are by the increasing length of daylight. The geese leave our shores in early April, at about the same time as storks are returning to Europe from their winter quarters in South Africa. At this time of year, millions of birds of all sorts, shapes and sizes are moving up and down the globe. And in each country in the Northern Hemisphere, one species or another is being welcomed as the herald of spring. In Germany, the return of the storks is an occasion for celebration, not least because they're survivors of a dwindling band. As weather prophets, the storks are very accurate. They move north with the European anticyclone, soaring around the eastern shore of the Mediterranean, propelled by the huge flow of warm air from the south. This air mass is, in a very real sense, the summer itself, and the storks come in on its leading edge. There may well be showers or patches of cool air within the summer airflow, but once the weather pattern has started to change from winter to summer, it will keep on. One swallow, or two storks for that matter, might not make a summer, but it's a sign that summer's not far away. Many people say that the best weather forecaster is the calendar. In terms of the average air temperature from season to season, that's true. From day to day in this country, it's a nonsense. Crocuses flower on about the same date every year, come snow or shine. They survive because at or around that date, the air temperature will almost certainly be suitable, even if on the day they first open it's a little chilly. Whether we recognize it or not, spring arrives more or less on cue every year. What we in Britain have to accept is that our little offshore islands have a climate which can be relied on, but weather which can't. That's probably why we have a worldwide reputation for talking about the weather, and furthermore, why we cast about desperately looking for clues, guessing the chances for tomorrow. We even listen to television weather forecasts. That's all from me, Chris Kelly. Now here's the weather forecast.
Leading by day all over the West Country and the dandelion clock's 3 hours slow, we shan't be looking for open scarlet pimpernels tomorrow. On the other hand, there was a lovely red sky tonight. My advice is to have a look at the sky in the morning before you set out. If you get water in your eye, it's raining.